Hey friends, thank you for joining me on a new Bible study through the book of Genesis. If this is your first time here, I just want to personally welcome you to the HomeGrown Ministries YouTube channel. I'm DJ, and on this channel I strive to provide you with biblical wisdom and encouragement to strengthen your walk of faith. Today we're going to be looking at the creation story, and this story comes from Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 2 verse 3. So a long section. I'm not going to read it to you, but I do want you to read through that section so you understand everything that I'm talking about today. Now before you read that section, please keep this in mind. Genesis was probably written around 1400 BC by Moses through the Holy Spirit. And that's important to remember because what you're actually reading is not the science behind creation. What you're reading is Moses' perspective on creation. And why that's important is because God always talks to us in a way in which we can understand. God could have provided Moses with the science behind creation, all the way down to the molecular level. But Moses wouldn't have been able to make sense of that. So God talks to him in a way in which a man who lived at 1400 BC would understand. We see this again in the New Testament when Jesus relates the message of the mustard seed, talking about how you have to have the faith of a mustard seed to his disciples. Jesus says that the mustard seed is the smallest seed. However, that's not true, and we know that today, that there are other smaller seeds. But at that time, to those people in that region of the world, the mustard seed was the smallest. So Jesus, being fully God, knew that there were other seeds that were smaller, but he used the mustard seed because it related to those people at that time. A real-life analogy that I can give you from my own experience is my daughter. She's 4 years old, and when she asks me about the sunset and the sunrise, I tell her that the sun is either going to bed or waking up. Could I provide her the science behind that? Yeah. Could I tell her that the Earth rotates around the sun and the sun is in a galaxy? And could I talk to her about the Earth's axis and that's why days are longer and shorter? I could do all those things. Not very well, because I'm not a scientist, but I could. However, she probably wouldn't be able to grasp all that information right now because she's 4. And God does the same thing to us. His intelligence is so much greater than ours that he relays information to us in a way in which we can understand. So yes, God talks to us like we are children. And that's what we're seeing here. And that's super important to keep in the back of your mind. Now then, that begs the question, were these literal 24-hour days or these sections of time? I don't know. I've been a young Earth creationist before. I've been an old Earth creationist before. And what I'll tell you is that's a secondary issue. It's not going to change your faith in Jesus one way or the other. It's not going to change your eternal destination one way or the other. It is interesting to talk about and discuss, but what you believe one way or the other isn't going to affect whether or not you go to heaven, because what matters is your belief in Jesus as the Son of God. However, there is a verse that I want to point out. I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other, but I'm trying to show that the Bible is an entire book, that we need to take in all of its context. This verse comes from 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. And at this time, in its own context, Peter is talking about the Lord's return. But because he's talking about how God views time, even though it's in reference to the Lord's return, it can also be applied to how God views time in regards to creation as well, because God would view time the same in every book of the Bible. So in that chapter and that verse, Peter says this, "But do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like one day." So it is possible that this is longer than 24-hour literal days. It's also possible that this is 24-hour literal days. I don't know. That's going to have to be up to you to decide and do more research on. Again, I'm not the guy for that, but I just want to show you that it is interpretable. And your interpretation of that passage, again, isn't going to change your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ one way or the other. However, what I do want to point out is that if you accept the very first 4 words of the entire Bible, in the beginning, God, you can accept everything else. If through faith you believe God was in the beginning, you can then believe every other miracle that's in the Bible. What's really interesting is even atheists believe in the first 3 words of the Bible, in the beginning. Any scientist right now who is worth his salt will tell you that there was a beginning to the universe. If you believe that, and you believe that the universe came into existence, that means you believe in some form of spontaneous creation, or you are arguing that there could be a creator. Either way, you're accepting the very first miracle that ever happened, God creating the universe. You might not call it God, but either way, that's a miracle. Based on the likelihood of that happening, just based on random chance, even that would have to be considered a miracle. So if you accept that miracle, you can accept anything else that's accounted for in the Bible. And I think that's fascinating. And moving on to some other just interesting tidbits of information in this section, we see that light was created on the first day, but the sun and the moon aren't created until day 4. And some people have said, how is that possible? How was light created before the sun? But I want to remind you that God is light, right? So because of that, the light that was provided was probably coming from God's existence, which is really cool in my mind, that God didn't even need to create the sun in order for light to exist because he is light. In addition, this account of creation is very interesting because it follows the current scientific theory of how the earth came to be. First, it's a formless, hard rock, which then gets water on it, which then gets land on it, which then gets fish on it, which then gets land animals on it, which then leads to us. That's currently the way in which science portrays the creation of the world. And this was written in 1400 BC. So that's really, really cool. And that just shows to me that the Bible is true because it's able to tell us things way before we ever knew the science behind it. Now then, God does create man in this section too. And there's two thoughts I have here that are really, really interesting in my mind. First comes from chapter 1, verse 26. And it says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image according to our likeness.'" Did you catch that? God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." When you ask about where's the Trinity in the Old Testament, the very first time we see it is in the 26th verse of the very first chapter. It's right there, guys. You may have read that passage a million times and not seen it, but right there, Moses is using the plural word. When God is referring to himself, he's referring to himself as a plural being, right? He is showing his divine nature here as being 3 persons. He's showing that he is the Trinity because he is referring to himself as a plural noun. And I think that's really cool. Really, really cool. Now, the other thing that I want to point out in regards to the creation of man is that we are created in God's image. You and I are image bearers of God, which means that every person you interact with is an image bearer of God, which means you have to treat them as an image bearer of God. They have rights, liberties, and they deserve to be treated with respect because they are image bearers of God. Regardless of race, ethnicity, skin color, gender, any of those things, they are all image bearers of God. Now, I do want to point this out. It is important to note that we are not all God's children. You become a child of God when you accept Jesus into your life. However, we all have the ability to become God's children, and we all are created in God's image. And that's something that, I sometimes say, hey, in my videos, we're children of God, but I'm referring to Christians. All Christians are children of God, but all people are created in the image of God. And that's a vital distinction that we need to be aware of as Christians. Now, we, as the human race, were given creation. We were given the ability to rule over it, to tame it, to work the land. And God said it was very good. Look how far we have fallen. We have taken what he gave us that was very good and destroyed it to its core. And then we look around and say, why is there evil in the world? Why are there, hurricanes and natural disasters? Look at the pollution we put in the water. Look at how we destroy the land. This is on us. We are called to be good stewards, and we fail time and time again. So Christians, if you're watching this video, you are called to be a good steward of the land. You are called to do right by it so that God's creation that was very good will continue to be very good and pleasing to God. Now, I know you don't have control over every human on the face of the planet, and people do horrible things to other humans as well as the earth, but as far as it is within your power, you are called to be a good steward of your environment. Now, when this section finishes, it tells us God looked at all of his creation, said it was very good, and then he rested. And if God rested, so should you. This is not talking about a rest of weariness. This is talking about a rest of satisfaction. And if God does that, you should too. And I'm speaking to a very specific type of person right now. If you are someone who is constantly working on projects, constantly volunteering your time, constantly being there for other people, and you don't rest, you will get burnt out. Be satisfied with the work that you've done and rest as God has rested. This is something that He gives us as an example right from the very beginning, that if you work for 6 days, you should rest on the seventh. So friends, if you are doing everything in your power to serve God and serve others, make sure you're also taking time to rest, because God did it as well. Guys, that's everything that I got from this passage. If you found something else of value that I didn't point out, or something that you think I missed, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And Christian friends, please continue to be the salt of the earth, be the light to the world, and go encourage somebody else today, because the world desperately, desperately needs it. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.